Alright, YouTube, we're back. We're talking some Final Fantasy IX Remake. We have a leak to look at involving the game, which we haven't actually done in quite some time. Like, we did a video somewhat recently involving, like, the title of the game potentially leaking, like, months ago at the point. We did a video, like, a month or so ago, and at that point, like, the information was, like, 2 or 3 months old or something like that. But besides that, like, an actual leak involving, like, details of the game itself, like, we haven't done that in probably, like, a year or more. I want to kind of clarify that just because we try not to be a channel that chases like every single leak that's out there, right? Like we try to kind of pace ourselves a little bit. I don't mind doing them every now and then, especially if they're like, you know, ridiculous leaks at times and they're fun to like tear apart and make fun of. That's fine, I guess. Anyways, when it comes to this leak in particular, it's pretty, I don't know, like basics, maybe the right word. It's not like anything crazy. It's not like the 7 Remake Part 3 leak we looked at recently, where that was like claiming like beat by beat story segments and shit that are going to happen. It's not like that. It's just talking about kind of like mechanics and like design of the game and things like that. Overall, there's nothing like too crazy from this leak or anything that like I think is out of the realm of possibility. There are a few things that I kind of question that we'll kind of talk about as we get into it, but overall it's a relatively like safe leak, I guess. Really quickly, shout out to the boy Mad Kaiser for letting me know about this FF9 leak. There actually is 2 smaller bits of info involving the 9 remake that are pretty interesting. That we'll talk about one right here before we hop into the leak, and we'll talk about the other one after the leak because it kind of involves the person we're getting the information from potentially. The first like small bit of info is a Reddit post I came across that's like a month old or so, and it's just a really good observation from somebody in the community that if you go to the Square Enix store and you click on like the franchise tab, Final Fantasy IX's there, which is a little bit weird. So if we look at the list of titles here, I would say for the most part they all qualify as franchises, right? Mana, Saga, Kingdom Hearts, Nier, Dragon Quest, Life is Strange, and The World Ends With You, and then a bunch of Final Fantasy stuff. It is a little bit strange that 16's there, because that is just a single-player game that had a couple of DLCs or expansions. Maybe that's why it's here, but if that's the case, then why isn't 15 here? So I'm not really sure why that's there. 14 sort of makes sense, I guess, as a franchise. It's been going on for a long time, a lot of expansions and DLCs and shit like that. Maybe that's why it's there. Final Fantasy is just a tab for a bunch of Final Fantasy products from all the different games. 7 makes sense, of course. There's the fucking compilation, and then in more recent years, we have the trilogy itself. And then, obviously, Crisis Core Union in somewhat recent times. And then there's Final Fantasy IX. Like, out of all the things listed right there in the franchises tab, like I would put Final Fantasy IX at the very bottom in what's considered a franchise. Like, it might be a single-player game just like 16, but at least 16 had DLCs, expansions, and shit, right? So maybe that qualifies it as a franchise. 9 is just Final Fantasy IX, at least as of right now. By that logic alone, every single numbered entry in the series should be individually listed under that franchise tab, but it's not, right? It's just FF9, and pretty much all the other numbered entries are just relegated to the Final Fantasy tab. So it seemed like Square Enix has aspirations to make FF9 into a franchise, obviously, which would be, I guess, maybe the original FF9, if you would include that, the 9 Remake, and then you have, obviously, other random merchandise, and then, like, the VV book that's coming out, like a little over a month at this point. Like, that qualifies it, I guess, as a franchise because you're expanding the lore with that book. And potentially anything beyond that, right? There could be spin-off games or other books or whatever. We don't exactly know at this point, but there definitely seems to be bigger plans for Final Fantasy IX. So big shout out to ColdDog5234 on the Final Fantasy IX subreddit for noticing this, because I thought it was a pretty interesting observation. So anyways, hopping into the leak, the information comes to us courtesy of Mika Gal, was maybe I say that name. It's not their information, but they're curating information from an insider on ResetEra, who they don't name. So they start off by saying, I'm sick with a bit of a fever and too much free time, so I tried to put together what was brought up and strongly hinted several times by one of the best insiders here about the remake, and it is very consistent. So first up they say, subtitled Timeless Tales, it was brought up even sooner than what I thought, lol. So the last bit they're referencing this insider referring to FF9 and Timeless Tale like in the past, I guess, a while ago. Again, they don't ever mention who it is or link to anything, so who knows. But they say that the person in a follow-up comment that the insider never like outright said FF9 Remake is going to be subtitled Timeless Tale, but they were making like vague statements like FF9 is a Timeless Tale. As for the subtitle Timeless Tale, this is already like a common belief, and it was what we talked about like a month or so ago when we talked about the leaked name for FF9 Remake, because there was a Reddit post from somebody like months before we ever got to the FF9 vinyl called Timeless Tale, who said that at their job, kind of on the back end of stuff, they were seeing something called Final Fantasy IX Timeless Tale Remake. And they further went on to explain that like their job is PC compatibility testing, which wouldn't be in regards to the vinyl itself, right? So it had to be something video game related. So if this was like absolute bullshit, they were just lying, pulling this out of their ass. Like them guessing that name is pretty insane. All this is to say that their claim of the subtitle being Timeless Tale isn't really like big information unless the insider that they're referencing said it like a long time ago, right? Because this goes back like 4 months. If their insider said it, you know, half a year ago or even more than that, like teasing something about, you know, 9 being a Timeless Tale or some shit like that, like that's interesting. But I don't know that because they don't leak to anything and they don't give us a source. They just say that there's an insider saying this shit. Their next claim is no 2D backgrounds, everything is 3D, but with a fixed camera. So this one I would say is pretty damn likely, but it kind of comes down to what kind of remake it actually is. Obviously, we've heard a little bit different stuff. Most of the time, what we hear is that it's going to be just pretty much FF9 better looking, right? But we've heard some other stuff here and there, kind of depending. I will say, though, I'm not entirely sure what the difference would be with the current FF9 and an FF9 Remake that is fixed camera but with 3D environments. Because, like, you already have a fixed camera when you're in locations in FF9, and there's, like, depth to them. You can walk kind of behind shit, right? So I don't know what the difference would actually be. It sounds like it'd be relatively the same to me. So if the entire game is a fixed camera, that would conflict with the overworld, which they do kind of touch on. So this person said, fixed but 3D camera is interesting. Wonder how they will do the world map. Probably like the original, but of course better looking. And they replied with something like Ni no Kuni 2, maybe. The world map definitely has aged a lot in the OG FF9. Which that part I absolutely disagree with. I think the FF9 overworld is perfectly fine. I think it's the best of the PlayStation era for sure out of 7, 8, 9. Has the most to do, right? Considering that after Final Fantasy 9, the franchise would go on to not have an overworld for the foreseeable future up until last year, 2024, right? FF7 Rebirth. Almost a quarter of a century. Like, the FF9 overworld is really the best you get in the franchise, I would say. Obviously not like super in-depth, it's a fucking PlayStation game, but there's kind of always something to do once you get to a new area, right? There's something to find, a side quest, a thing to do, or maybe backtrack to a previous area to do something. There's kind of always something, right? As for the Ni no Kuni 2 comparison, I mean, I've never played the series, so I just pulled up some random gameplay, and like, it looks good. I wouldn't mind, you know, an FF9 remake resembling this a little bit when you're kind of exploring the overworld, sure. I will say, me personally, like, I prefer a 3D camera pretty much at all times in most games. There's obviously something to be said about like artistic like perspective and shit like that. You can look to like the older Resident Evil games with the fixed cameras. Obviously with like 7, 8, and 9, when it comes to like locations that you're inside of, there's no 3D camera. It's just the overworld, right? So like I'm fine with that in most games. Like if that's a thing, it doesn't really bother me too much. But most of the time, I prefer being able to control the camera. Their next claim is voice acting is in and can be toggled on and off. So this is the first one for me that I question. Only because I don't have experience with games that allow you to do that have voice acting, but you can just turn it off. You can just click off and I guess just maybe read the text or something. Like obviously you can literally do that with pretty much any game. If there's subtitles, you can just mute your TV, I guess. You'd be missing out on music and background sound effects and things like that or whatever, but you could do that. And maybe most games offer like a dialogue voice like slider where you could just turn down like people talking, I guess. That's maybe a possibility. But in terms of like remakes of older games that didn't have voice acting, that have it now with the remake, like, is that a common thing? I've never experienced that. You guys can let me know. Is there like an option in remakes of games often where you could turn voice acting off? Now that aside, I'm fine with that, right? If they do have voice acting in the game and they give you the option to turn it off for those that want to do that, like that's cool. There's no problem there, obviously. I have no intentions of turning that off if that is an option. Like I want the voice acting in the game. Like I want to hear that shit. Some of the iconic lines in FF9 being voiced by people. Like I'm down for that. And I prefer that anyways over having to read the text the whole time, right? Like I want to hear that shit. Next one is pretty short and sweet, turn-based combat. One is relatively common when it comes to the 9 remake, at least from the stuff that we've looked at. Most times people are claiming that the combat would be relatively the same, you know, turn-based combat, ATB, that sort of thing. Like there's been a few, I think, sometimes where they try to claim like they're going to alter the combat or maybe action RPG type shit like 7 remake, but that's not very, very common. I assume that the 9 remake would be some iteration of ATB / turn-based, which I think anybody that is a fan of Final Fantasy 9, that's what they want. Like it'd be stupid for them to change the combat. Obviously they need to alter it a bit, speed that shit up, let us control trance a little bit, maybe some other things here and there, but for the most part, just keep it the same. Like why? Next up, new party members like Beatrix and others for the post-game only. So this was the other one that I very much question, because what post-game are they talking about? FF9 and pretty much most RPGs, most Final Fantasy games, just fucking end when you beat it. There's like new game plus type shit in the franchise with like Crisis Core and stuff. And then you obviously have like chapter select and like hard mode and shit when it comes to 7 Remake, 7 Rebirth or whatever. But there's not like a post game or whatever. You don't get to beat the final boss like Skyrim or something and get to explore the world and keep questing. That's just not how these games usually work, right? So I don't really know what they mean by post game. Also, if you have to beat the game first to then get like Beatrix and like Marcus and Blank and Sentinel in your party, like what would be the point of that? What are they even doing? You're just like beat the final boss and get to run around the world or something and get to like level them up and use them. Like, fuck fun is that? Maybe they do mean like a new game plus sort of thing, like you beat the game and then like maybe you can do another playthrough and then they're a part of your party or something like that. I don't know exactly. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not really entirely sure what they mean. It makes more sense in a remake of FF9 that they'd allow you to like incorporate them into your party once you come across them in the story and they start fighting alongside you, things like that, right? Now, I will say, to kind of argue in favor of the post-game thing, when it comes to the guest members that we get throughout FF9, like more often than not, when they're not with our group fighting alongside us, they're kind of busy doing other shit in the story. Like Beatrix, for example, after she goes away from Queen Braun, she kind of becomes a good guy or whatever. Like, she's always in Alexandria kind of taking care of shit there, right? So it wouldn't make a lot of sense for her to, like, go away from that and be questing alongside us and shit for the main story. So also, if you take these, like, additional party members from the original FF9 and kind of incorporate them into the main party, then you have to, like, add in, like, dialogue and shit like that and, like, you know, voice acting if there's voice acting for all these characters all the time, depending on whatever combination of party members that we have and stuff, right? So I don't know if that's realistic, so it kind of makes sense if there was, like, additional members to the party that we didn't have in the original game, that it would be like some sort of post-game, new game plus sort of thing, potentially. I will say, though, when we discussed this in the past, I have brought up the Dragon Quest VIII comparison with the 3DS version of that game, where they overhauled the game a lot, but they did add in additional party members. Now, they were side characters in the original Dragon Quest VIII, right? Or Mori was a side character, Red was a little bit in the main story. But that's kind of all they were. They weren't anything like super important to the overall game. But you could get them in your party in the 3DS version of the game, but I don't believe they impacted the story at all. Maybe they have like a little bit of lines of dialogue. Maybe they changed cutscenes ever so slightly or something. But for the most part, I think they're just people you can just throw in your party and fight with. But like the game plays out pretty much the exact same. They could do something kind of similar with the 9 Remake, where you can get like Beatrix and Marcus and maybe Blank and Senna in your party, and they're simply there just for like fighting. That's it. Like they're not in any kind of cutscenes or any dialogue segments or anything like that. They're just kind of there as optional party members if you want to use them. But to also kind of bring that back a little bit, I talked about this with my video I did where I talked about what I want from a 9 Remake. Like, a lot of the additional party members aren't super unique, because like Beatrix, Marcus, and Blank all use swords, right? They all use the same weapons as Steiner. Now, Marcus and Blank use a little bit different gear, like kind of like Zidane, like light armor and shit. But essentially, both of them are just a mixture of Steiner and Zidane, right? Steiner weapons, Zidane gear. And Beatrix is pretty much just a female Steiner, right? So like there's not a uniqueness to them. Senna is probably the most unique one, just because he uses like a hammer, so he has like his own weapon category, and then what kind of gear he's meant to use, I'm not entirely sure, because you don't really get to use him or control him in the story, right, or fight. When it comes to the conversation of like optional new party members or whatever, I don't know what all they would do, because there's not really a reason to do like Beatrix and Marcus and Blank and really Senna, because there's not enough variety there. Like, I'd be fine with essentially just Beatrix and Marcus, because Marcus you get the most time with in the original FF9, right? He fights alongside Garnet and Steiner for quite a long time. And he'd be essentially like a mixture, again, of Steiner and Zidane. So there's like a unique kind of character build there, if that makes any sense. And then Beatrix is just a female Steiner, but she does get access to like the female-only accessories, right? So there's at least a little uniqueness there. Plus, she's just a very popular character that people want to play as. It's been kind of a long time on that particular entry, but I want to kind of get all my thoughts out there. Let's move on. In terms of budget and scope, it's not as cheap as Trials of Mana and not FF7 Remake budget at all, but closer to the Trials of Mana, Romancing Saga 2 ballpark in the end. It is a faithful remake of the OG. Live Alive or Link's Awakening remake style are other points of comparison brought up. This particular entry, like the Trials of Mana thing, stood out to me a little bit, just because it's something we've actually heard before from Midori however long ago. It was something like Trials of Mana to a certain degree, but maybe like bigger in scope. Specifically, they had said it was similar in style to Trials of Mana in many different ways for a period of time. It is a remake that is a little higher than a Mana remake. It is not HD2D style, but it's also not FF7R style. So it makes me wonder who the insiders that they're talking about, because is there multiple insiders, leakers out there that are using the Trial of Mana comparison, or is their fucking insider just Midori on like a burner account or some shit? I don't know. Either way, when it comes to like Square Enix's more recent like remakes and remasters and shit, they look beautiful. So I'm not really concerned about the budget necessarily, as long as the game looks good and it's just like a faithful remake. And last up, they say releasing 2026 at the earliest. I'm pretty confident we have a pretty accurate description of the remake. Back to coffee now, lol. So as for our 2026 release at the earliest, I think at this point it makes a lot of sense. We're pretty much halfway through 2025, right? And presumably Square Enix will want to market the 9 Remake before they release it. People are kind of interested in the shadow drop and shit these days. It kind of works for certain games. I don't know that Square Enix would ever do that. More than likely, once they officially announce the 9 Remake, they're going to want to market it for a handful of months, half a year, something like that. So 2026, I think, makes sense. So it's really kind of it for this leak. Like I said towards the beginning of the video, there's nothing like bad about it. It's like a pretty safe leak. There's nothing that's like out of the realm of possibility. And to the point that like they could just be making all this shit up, but be correct about it once the game actually comes out, because it's like kind of that safe, if that makes any sense. Now, I mentioned towards the beginning of the video that we have like another piece of information that's potentially tied to this person that we're talking about on ResetEra. And what it was is I tried to Google their name, Mikagao, or however you say that shit. I don't know if it's like a video game character, anime character, or something like that, trying to figure out how to pronounce it. And I came across a Twitter that uses that name, potentially maybe the same person. And the Twitter account was the second thing suggested on Google, but the tweet that it's actually given us like a little preview of was very, very interesting. So this person was replying to a tweet from Audrey about a month ago where she was talking about the FF9 merchandise and the Vivi hat. And they say, there's a game section in the website code, not up yet. I have no doubt this website will lead to the remake announcement, maybe in July for the anniversary date. And Audrey says, oh, with a bunch of question marks, and the person says, found by a user from ResetEra. So if you look at this image that is apparently the coding for the 25th anniversary website for FF9, you can see that it says news category game. It also says goods, books, music, and other. In the coding of the website, there's a section for video games, which I feel like is a pretty substantial piece of information. And whether or not it matters, it does say game singular, whereas like some of the other ones like goods or books are plural, obviously. Maybe that is indicative of a single release and not a multi-part release, which some people are worried about. Also might confirm potentially that there's not going to be spin-off games, at least maybe not anytime soon. And when it comes to this video, like the first thing we talked about, which was the franchise thing on the Square Enix store, and like this last bit right here with like the coding of the anniversary website, I think they're the more interesting bits of information. Like I think those are more interesting than like a potential leak or whatever, because it's kind of a generic leak. There's some interesting stuff, I guess, but like these two things I think are very important. Having Final Fantasy IX labeled as a franchise in the Square Enix store is certainly very interesting, and then obviously within the coding of the website, having a category for games means something's definitely happening. But of course, my dude, this is where I pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on the leak that we talked about in this video? But also, more specifically, what are your thoughts on the two other things? What are your thoughts on the franchise thing with the Square Enix store and also the coding of the anniversary website? So, my dudes, that is the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search network in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, _DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like low gain or leave it like